All right, so let's recap where we started with yesterday. So completing the square is a method that combines factoring and square roots. So it's going to involve you factoring an expression into a perfect square binomial and then taking the square root of it. So that's pretty much what we did with example 1. Example 1, it was already set up for us to factor it, then take the square root of it, and be done with it. But that's not going to work out all the time. So that's when we were introduced to the concept of completing the square. That's when you divide by the a value, take half of the b value and square it, attach it to the end of the problem, and then factor it. So that's the process of completing the square. We use that process to then actually solve the equation. So yesterday we did example 1, but I'm going to redo example 1, going through each of the steps one by one, just to make sure that we're on the same page going through the procedure for completing the square. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at example number 1. Again, we did it yesterday, but we're going to go through the process one more time so that we're all on the same page. So, first step, add or subtract the constant term to the other side of the equation. Again, this is necessary. So a constant term is the number that doesn't have a variable on it. So if we look at example 1, x squared minus 10x equals 24. The only number that doesn't have a variable on it is the 24, and it's already on the other side of the equation. So we don't have to do step 1. Steps 2 through 5 is the process of completing the square. So step 2, divide both sides by the a value if there is one. So a is equal to 1. If we divide everything by 1, nothing changes. So we don't need to do step 2. Step 3, take half the b value and square it. So the b value is the number that's sitting in front of x, which in this case is negative 10. So we take half the b value and then square it. So negative 10 over 2 squared is negative 5 squared, that's 25. So that completes step 3. Step 4, add the squared value to both sides of the equation. So we're going to take 25 and add it to both sides of the equation. So we started with x squared minus 10x equals 24. We're going to add 25 to both sides of the equation. Remember, you can't change one side of the equation without doing it to the other side. Basic fundamental rule for solving the equation. Step 5, factor the left-hand side using MAF and simplify the right-hand side. So if we factor the left-hand side, that's x minus 5, x minus 5, which becomes x minus 5 squared, equals 49. Now, you can go from here to there in one step, then that's fine. If you need to write it out twice and then put it squared, that's fine too. It depends on what you're comfortable with. Any questions getting to this point? Nope. You don't want the constant term on the other side. That's the method. If you're doing it that way, you're trying to solve it by factoring. So here we're completing the square. So you want all the variables on one side, and you want all the constants on the other to start the problem. All right, through step 5, step 6, take the square root of both sides. Now you're in a position where you can actually take the square root. So now you take the square root of both sides. That gives you x minus 5 equals plus or minus 7. So then to solve the remaining equation, this means you have two equations. X minus 5 equals positive 7. X minus 5 equals negative 7. So one of your answers is 12. One of your answers is negative 2. Now, if you had the equation like this, and you just added the 5 over to make it 5 plus or minus 7, you still have to do the same thing. 5 plus 7 is 12. 5 minus 7 is negative 2. Do not leave it as 5 plus or minus 7. Do not leave it that way. The only time you can leave it that way is if you have an imaginary number or a square root. The only time you can leave it that way is if you have an imaginary number or a square root. If you have whole numbers, you need to separate it. If you have whole numbers, you need to separate it. So again, if we get example number 1, just to go through the steps again. Any questions before we go to example 2? Not hearing any, not seeing any. Let's go on to example number 2. So again, we're still following the same 7 steps. Again, I'm purposely going slow to walk through each step. For some of you, you're gonna solve it a lot faster than how I'm showing it. That's okay. Go at a quicker pace if you know what you're doing. So 3x squared plus 6x equals negative 9. First step, add or subtract the constant term to the other side of the equation. So the constant term is negative 9, and it's already separated from the variables. So you don't have to do step number 1. So step 1 is taken care of. Step 2, divide both sides by the a value, if there is one. So a is equal to 3. This time you have an a value. So you're going to divide everything by 3. Divide everything by 3, you have x squared plus 2x equals negative 3. So if there's an a value, divide it out. Step 3, take half the b value and square it. So b is equal to 2. So if we take half the b value and square it, b over 2 squared, that's equal to 2 divided by 2 squared. That's 1 squared, which is 1. So that means we're going to add 1 to both sides of this equation. X squared plus 2x equals negative 3. So you're going to add 1 to both sides. So that took care of step 4. Factor the left-hand side using MAF and simplify the right-hand side. X squared plus 2x plus 1. So we need two numbers that multiply to 1 and add up to 2. That's x plus 1 and x plus 1. X plus 1 squared equals negative 2. Any questions before we continue? So we've done the factoring part. Now we're going to do the square root part. Take the square root of both sides. Square and square root drop out. So that's x plus 1 equals plus or minus. Here you have the square root of negative 2. This is where some people on the quiz put no solution or not a real answer. You don't have the option for that anymore. You can take the square root of a negative number, take the square root of the number, which 2 doesn't break down anymore, and then you put an I either in front of the square root or behind the square root. But that's how you take care of the negative square root. You are no longer allowed to just not take the negative square root. Simplify it. So this is what we have. We still got to get x by itself. So subtract 1 on both sides. So you get x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 2i. Please pay attention to how it was written. If you have an I in the problem, then it has to be put in standard form. This is in standard form. Referring back to your quiz, some of you all got some of the right answers, the right numbers, but you were penalized for not putting it into standard form. So if you have complex numbers, make sure you put it in standard form. If you don't know whether or not you did it, I sent you your quiz back. Feel free to look at the comments that I put within your quiz. Questions on examples 1 or 2? All right, let's move on, and I'm going to blow the screen up just a little bit, give myself a little bit more room. So for this problem, I'm going to start it for you, and then I'm going to give you a few moments to start working through it yourself. Yes. So, example 3, 2x squared plus 24x minus 90 equals 0. So now we have a situation in which we're going to have to move a constant term. So when you are completing the square, you want variable terms on one side and constant terms on the other. That's how you want to start. You want to start with variable terms on one side and constant terms on the other. That means that negative 90 has to move. So negative 90 has to move. Put it on the other side of the equation. Put it on the other side of the equation. That's how you want to start the problem. So now this problem is not that much different than any other problem. So we pause my report. All right, so we took care of the first step, which was to move the negative 90 over, make it positive 90. Next step is to get rid of the a value. So the a value is 2. So everything is going to get divided by 2. X squared plus 12x equals 45. So now we have to handle the b value. b is equal to 12. Take half the b term and square it. 12 divided by 2 squared. 6 squared, which is 36. So 36 is what you are adding to both sides. And make sure you add it to both sides. Factor the left-hand side. That's x plus 6 and x plus 6. X plus 6 squared. 45 and 36 is 81. Any questions getting to this part? So we've taken care of the factoring part. Now we take care of the square root part. Square root part, x plus 6. Take the square root of both sides. Square root drop out. X plus 6 equals plus or minus 9. get x equals negative 6 plus or minus 9. So remember, it can't stay that way. Negative 6 plus or minus 9. Those are both whole numbers, so you're required to separate it. So negative 6 plus 9, 3. Negative 6 minus 9, negative 15. That's it. Problem's over. Both of them. You put 3 in, you put negative 15. So if you give one, then you're getting penalized for not giving the other. So the directions just tell you to solve the equation, then there's your two answers. If the problem asked you find the sum of the solutions, then you would have added those two up. That's the exact same thing that was on your quiz. If it asks you to find the sum, that means adding. So add the two answers up. Remember, when you're taking a quiz or a test, you can ask for clarification. I just can't tell you how to solve the problem. I can add, you can ask, what does it mean by find the sum? If you don't know that sum means adding, then I can tell you that it means add the answers up. Clarification is one thing. Telling you how to do it is the other. Questions on example number 3? Nothing in the chat here. And make sure that you have what you need once you get to the point where you're going to have to do this yourself. So the last thing, to make sure we're all on the same page, is to do one that involves decimals. We'll put in one that's going to pop off and get you decimal answers. We may not finish it in the time that's allotted, so I'll make sure to finish the recording so that it has been there. So, example 4. So you get a bonus example. So your bonus example has the following. That's going to be, make sure I do this right, 2x squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0. So it is going to have decimals in it, so I will warn you of that in advance. First step, the constant term has to move. That's the positive 5. Constant term has to move. Put it on the other side of the equation. 2x squared minus 6x equals negative 5. So that's first. Now you take care of the a value. A is equal to 2. So everything gets divided by 2. So x squared minus 3x equals negative 2.5. So again, calculator is a beautiful thing. Now we take care of the b value. B is equal to negative 3. Take half the b value and then square it. That's negative 3 over 2 squared. Negative 1.5 squared, which is 2.25. So that's what you're going to add to both sides. That's what we're adding to both sides. So, left-hand side still has to be factored, which, with it being a decimal, that's pretty icky to have to factor it. But, you were shown yesterday the shortcut for rewriting, completing the square. So let me remind you about the shortcut. If you start with x squared plus bx, then completing the square will transform it to x plus b over 2 squared. So that's how the problem should look. So the left-hand side, b was equal to negative 3. Negative 3 divided by 2 is negative 1.5. X minus 1.5 squared equals negative 2.5 plus 2.25 is negative 0.25. So that was the formula that was in the box yesterday. That formula comes in handy when you're dealing with fractions and decimals. Any questions before we continue? Alright, so let's finish our problem. We've taken care of the factoring part. Take the square roots of both sides. So, on the left-hand side, the square and the square root drops out. That's x minus 1.5 equals plus or minus. If you take the square root of negative 0.25, you get plus or minus 0.5 I, or you can just put 0.5 I. For those of you with graphing calculators, I'll make sure to show in the video how do you change your calculator into that format so that it will produce an I for you. Add 1.5 to both sides. So that gives you x equals 1.5 plus or minus 0.5 I. So there's a fourth example that involves you having decimals in the problem. Because it's going to show up in your homework and potentially on your unit test and potentially on your final. So now we've gone through solving the equations using completing the square. Tomorrow will be the last part, which is writing quadratic functions from standard form to vertex form. Stop.